but I'll just put it onto the next slide so you can see what we're going to cover this evening. So the session outcomes I've got for this evening, we're going to look at the goal. We're going to look at what you want to teach and coach in a given session, given activity. So knowing the desired outcome will drastically impact on what intervention, what activities you think about using. So is it a drill? Is it a skill-based activity? Is it a fun-based game? What is all the stuff that you need to do? The next part is the athlete themselves, so your audience. So once you know what you want to teach and the key role of the outcome that you're trying to get from that, it's looking at the person that you're trying to teach or the people you're trying to work with and knowing what's their motivations, what's going to really engage with them. How do young people learn best? And to be honest, if we ever want to learn, probably one of the best places for us to learn is to look at the people that can create computer games. They invest hundreds of millions into research every year all around the world to understand how young people love to learn, love to play games, and what motivates them, because that allows them to develop games what sell millions of copies and engage kids, engross kids on their PlayStations or their Xboxes. So there's a little bit that we'll talk about that this evening and how we can learn from other areas. How do we learn skills? Very simple, covering that around that happens and making sure every session is inclusive. We need to make sure whatever we do, everybody's engaged and everybody has some sort of excitement, enjoyment from that experience. The final bit, really, the wrap up bit, and is you, the coach. What's the best way that you can teach skills and get that information across? What's the coaching approach you should use? And there's lots of different variations of that. And coaching interventions that we can introduce. And I've got a series, loads of activities. But what I want to share with you when we get to that point is that that's the key crunch. That is how we develop skills by using fun games. So it's not just playing a game, it's having a purpose to playing a game and why we can really learn from that. And then finally, really a challenge to yourselves at the very end, sort of like how you can measure if you're having the best possible impact. So that level of reflective practice, that level of you being adaptable with whatever you try. Okay, so we're going to make a start, everybody. So thanks for the questions coming through. As always, we're recording our webinars, so a copy of this will appear on Athletics Hub in the future. So if you miss anything or you want to reconfirm anything, it will be available. And as I say, if you've got any questions, just post them towards the end of the presentation. We're gonna the first 45, 50 minutes is going to be me presenting. Last 10, 15 minutes will be just a chance to go through any questions. And as I say, Andy will be supporting me through that. So let's start off with a goal. So what do you want to teach / coach? Now, normally when we talk about coaching athletics events, the first thing everybody defaults to is the technical aspect. We want to make somebody the most efficient runner or the most efficient high jumper or given the best technical throwing and release angles and all these sort of things that are the first thing we jump. And then the next bit what jumps into our mind is the physical aspects. Well, we need to make sure that they've got the right energy systems and they're in best condition physically they can be. And then we move on to psychology. And I think what we have to understand is when we look at youngsters, all of them areas are really important, but we need to understand a lot more around, well, actually, what else are we trying to achieve? Because one of the fundamental things when we work with the youth age group is not only improving our skills, but it's retaining them. And I'd say lots of people probably on this webinar have got lots of experience of having really good ways of retaining youngsters. And they've probably seen examples where lots of youngsters are left the sport, even if they're the most talented individuals, purely because they just haven't had the right motivation. So what we need to understand is, what are we trying to achieve whenever we set a task, set a session, set an activity? Okay, now typically we think about like the better skill that we give them, the more practice that they do in a particular way, the better they're going to be. And that is correct, you know. So if you've ever seen books like The Talent Code by Dan Core or Bounce by Matthew Said, they talk about the 10,000 hours of deliberate practice, this skill of developing the ability to be a higher performer, highly skilled individual within a particular realm. So piano players, 10,000 hours of practice, they believe will make you like a top level piano player. Similar in sport. Now, the 10,000 hours, I think, vary massively between different individuals. But purposeful, deliberate practice has been shown to massively improve every individual. So we need to introduce that. But what I'm going to pose to you tonight is maybe we youngsters, we don't just do drill-based, deliberate practice, which is more akin to adults. Maybe we should do it in a slightly different way, which has a different outcome, a different goal at the same time as trying to get them technically better. So for me, it's about other things. It's about understanding how the children are going to have fun in your session. You know, are they having fun? Are they engaged? Because if they're having fun and they're like engaged in every activity you do, the chances of them coming back and trying more, practicing more and developing more is far higher. Are we helping them master skills? So since lockdown, my daughter's learned to ride a bike without stabilizers, which the thrill that gives that person is huge. You know, so it's not about how fast somebody's rode that bike. It's not about this pressure to succeed in any way. It's the ability to master something that they've tried really hard, struggled with a bit, but they've managed to come through that. It's also about making friends, you know, so can we set up environments where we're allowing them to make friends, activities, introducing them to a whole group of friends? There's probably lots of people on this call who have friends they've made through sports clubs or even as a coach who they've been friends with for many years. And that's one of the beauties of sport. So can we still set goals, what make that happen? And then finally, being successful. Kids still like to be successful, whether it's a sports or competition, whether it's a YDL, whether it's just personal best and personal achievements or even a club competition. We need to understand, are we complementing to them? So what I want to do is almost share with you a bit of experience, a bit of a radical sort of things that I've done in the past when I've worked with youth groups, and some people that are on the call probably will remember some of these activities that I've experienced. So I'm going to talk about from kabaddi to crab dodgeball to domes and dishes, okay, and what is the purpose of doing these. Now I want to share with you some interesting parts around tennis coaches in terms of really good tennis coaches that I know, and I've read about other examples of great tennis coaches, have taken a young person and the first couple of lessons, they've said to them, right, you don't need your tennis racket. We're going to teach you to move around the court, understand how you move around, create space, how you understand to accelerate into space, and read my movements as I do pretend shots to you. And then after a couple of lessons, the parents tend to approach that tennis coach and go, I'm paying you to teach my son or daughter tennis. Why are you making them run around without a tennis racket? Tennis coaching involves a tennis racket and a tennis ball. What they don't understand is that coach is trying to teach that individual player court awareness, because if they don't know how to move around the court based on their opponent, and they don't know how to accelerate into space, they don't know how to move backwards and forwards and in different directions, then it doesn't matter how good the shot is. If they can't get to the desired position, they can't make the return shot. So one of the things that we need to be aware of is sometimes when we do games is what is the perception of other coaches, is the kids themselves, the parents watching, what is the purpose of the game? Because there's no point in just playing a game without making any sort of link back to the sport skills. I come to athletics because I want to be a better runner, jumper or thrower. So I use domes and dishes is probably the game that most people are familiar with, sometimes called cups and saucers. And when you look at that, that is simply a game of changing them. So this is a dome and this is a dish. And all you do is in teams, you change it around. Now, I use that for very specific purposes. I use that to teach agility. I use that to teach the principle of children lean in the direction they want to accelerate towards, and they push away from the direction that they are at. So they push down and back to move up and forwards. They lean in the direction they want to move to. They practice accelerations to small cones all over the place. I get multiple acceleration mechanics practice in there, and at a young age, I'm starting to educate them around that. I'm giving them spatial awareness because they're starting to be aware of everybody around them. They're starting to use low to high movements, not dissimilar to what we would encourage in throwing activities. And we start to really see that they brace their core as they land down. And we stop the game, we teach them some of them principles, and we put them back in the game. Now they think we're just trying to help them be better at domes and dishes, but essentially we're trying to help teach them acceleration skills, bracing skills, low to high skills. So think about, why am I doing the game? Crab dodgeball is, I've played this game many a time with lots and lots of kids, and essentially it's you basically do a reverse plank. You're on your hands and your feet, and you move around like a crab, and you just kick the ball away from yourself to stop it hitting you on the body. You just roll it in if you're the coach. And simply that is developing tricep strength, it's developing core strength, it's developing lateral movements. So it's really key that we look at these areas and go to ourselves, well, I could just get them to do tricep extension. I could get them to just do core and plank stuff, but why not get them to do a fun game where they don't even realize they're doing that? Okay, and then finally, Kabaddi is a real random game that some people may be familiar with. So Kabaddi is a game that has come from Asia, and essentially it's like a game of team tag, the way I've adapted it and the way other people have used it. So essentially you work as a team to send one person in, they tag the individual and they run back out to safety. If they get tagged on the way out, then they're out of the game. Now, what am I trying to develop there? Well, I'm trying to develop acceleration mechanics, I'm trying to develop decision-making skills, and I'm trying to develop teamwork. Now, in essence, they all look like games, but the beauty of it is thinking about how you can change the dynamics to learn and teach skills from there. Okay, so hopefully that all makes sense. That should be the purpose of the goal. So whenever you're looking at a game, really have a clear understanding of what the purpose you're trying to achieve from that game. Because if it's just a game and you're not really adding any technical points or understanding what you're trying to achieve from it, then the kids are going to get bored after a while because they're not learning anything new. So the audience, let's have a look at the audience. If any of you have seen research around young people, motivation to do sport, normally this is the same. I've looked at research for the last 15, 20 years in terms of youth development, child development, and it hasn't really changed in terms of the major statements. So children participate in sport for fun and enjoyment. It tends to come out the top of all of the voting. Mastery of skill or perceived competence tends to be quite high up there as well. Parents and teachers being your role models, your motivators to join a club or join a community group is at a high level. And then learning new skills, something that they haven't learned before, quite excited about, something new they might have seen on TV they want to do. I'm sure there's people who have seen kids come down and want to do pole vault because they thought it looked really cool on TV. So that's an example of that. Meeting new friends and peers and belonging to a group, that identity, and then be successful, gain recognition. But the reason why they drop out is pretty much the flip side of that. So there's a level of boredom, a lack of success, right, tends to happen. Too much pressure coming in from parents, coaches, peers about you have to do this, you have to be at this level if you want to be good. Loss of interest. Friends leaving the sport, which obviously is a key driver, and the main sort of reverse is it just stopped being fun, and typically what we see is some kids move from fun-based activities to more traditional-based, and that transition is quite a tough one because if they're not ready for the more traditional athletics, it might be the bit what pushes them away. So we always got to constantly reflect on what's the best experience and what motivates them young people to be in our sport. Some of the key things, what we've seen at the highest level, this is a piece of research that we did back in 2011, but we've also done another piece of research more recently. Pretty much the same things come out. Reason why people are dropping out of athletics, and this isn't just the UK, this is globally, I would say injuries, where they just haven't managed to recover from or it's taken too long to recover from. Being caught up by late developers, so some of the individuals might have been mature and then they've been caught up. And then education and other demands has pulled them away from the sport. But the key bits I wanted to highlight is the main reasons why some people cite critical success factors is this intrinsic motivation, this enjoyment. Still at the very top end, athletes love what they do. It isn't just a business in some people's view. They still really enjoy what they do. And through the whole process, they enjoy it a lot. And they do refer back to having great coaching, recognize that and work with them on that, and friends and family who support them through that process is really critical. Catherine Mary said at an awards once that she wanted to thank the coach that first introduced her to athletics and taught her the basics of all the different areas, because if it wasn't for that person, she wouldn't have the motivation to move on. before she moved on to multiple other coaches, and with Linford had a lot of success. There's key bits where we have a massive role as youth coaches to keep people happy, enjoying the sport, and keep them in the sport, so we can see them fulfill their potential at a later stage. So I looked when preparing for this presentation a while back and just looked at the wider learning. So we need to look wider than just sport. So why do people really want to learn? What helps them learn best? And there was pretty much the same sort of statements coming through. So from a website called How Youth Learn, which is an American-based website, I believe, they had some really interesting research. But a couple of things that they cited was learning involves direct experience, deep immersion, and consequential activity. So like what we're looking at is they want to be deep. They want that deliberate practice. They want to understand what they're doing. They learn best when the young person is focused on a few things. So this is the bit as coaches where we can't overwhelm with lots of stuff. So sometimes I say the best way to play a game or an activity with young athletes is set up the game, give them the most basic rules, start playing the game, and then gradually drip feed in more information, because that gets them going quickly. When they see a clear purpose of what they're supposed to be doing, that's really critical. So you might have lots of kids will come up to you, go, what are we doing? Why are we doing that? You might think that they're just being challenging, but actually it's a really good learning opportunity for them. So we should let them build on that and really make the most of that. And this is the real key one. I thought this was quite a powerful message. When they have an active co-constructing role within that. So when they're actually involved in developing their own experience of sports learning. We've got to remember, kids on a playground will set up two goals with 4 jumpers and start playing a football game and have rules and make sure it's fair and play competitively. They structure that themselves. They don't need teachers to help them on playgrounds to do that. Athletes will do the same thing. Many people in this course of this webinar have probably had athletes that have come down and said, I've seen this drill or activity on YouTube. I want to try it. It looks really, really good. And to a certain degree, it's great that they're actually going out there and learning that stuff. So we need to embrace that, and we need to help them be involved in their own learning, because it is critical. In terms of motivation, the other interesting part, again, from the same website, is that it is seen as a powerful engine for learning. If we really can motivate the youngsters, we can really tick them boxes, then the chance of them learning any activity we're doing, making the most of it, is really high. So it's stronger when it emerges from the person's prior knowledge and interest. So if we try and relate activities to what they do, then they probably will really enjoy that. When it's more about the task itself than reward or punishment, then that's where they see a really positive impact on it. When it's driven by desire for the mastery of the skill, and it helps them identify with others, is really important. And so it's got to be meaningful. It's got to have a purpose to it. And this is just general learning for youth age group, but I think it's really applicable to when we work with youngsters. So when we start to go, well, why am I going to pick a game or an activity or a drill? Ask yourself the question, is it the right activity or drill or skill or game to motivate the youngsters? I would use lots of games like Crab Dodgeball, because it was the first game that the kids wanted to do. And after a few minutes, they self-constructed the rules. They started adding in their own rules and started playing the game themselves. Well, what that means is they're probably more likely to do that stuff at home as well. So at this point, I'm just going to bring in the learning pyramid. I'm not sure how many people on the webinar have seen this before, but it's a really interesting way of looking at how we coach, how we teach skills, and how much of that information is retained. Just out of interest, just a bit of interaction between everybody on the webinar. How many people are homeschooling at the moment? Brilliant, lots of people. Okay, so just before we made the event go live, myself and Andy were talking about the joys of homeschooling. And what I found fascinating, so I've got an 8-year-old and I've got a 3-year-old, and the 8-year-old has really tried. But it's quite amazing that you talk about one topic and then the next day she completely forgot about that same topic you talked about. And I'm wondering, am I doing it wrong? And my wife's been brilliant at doing all that stuff and working really well to help the learning. But when you look at this model, there's a real interesting sort of thing where you look at it and you go, that might be the reason why. Okay, so so hearing a few people coming in there. Sarah's missing, daughter's missing GCSEs, not great. So yeah, there's lots of challenges going on. But here's an interesting thing where we can help them better. So average retention rate from attending a lecture is 5%. Hopefully for yourselves, it's going to be higher than 5% after listening to me. But reading gives you 10%. Audio visual, I'll argue I'm doing audio visual at the moment because it's a slightly better retention rate, 20%. And even demonstrations, us giving effective demonstrations to athletes is only 30%. So if we give them a really good drill demonstration, it doesn't always sink in. But if you go for the big hit, what's the big ways that we can get them involved? Practice by doing. So them experiencing it and learning what they need to do. But finally, teaching others. Teaching others and immediately using that skill. So you can teach kids a particular task and to get them to teach each other to reinforce understanding. If they're at that point where they can actually teach another person, whether it's the warm up, whether it's a particular drill, whether it's the rules of a game, then that's a really powerful way of making sure they retain the information. So maybe it's an opportunity for us as coaches to reflect and go, well, I am doing good games and I am doing good drills, but maybe I need to be a little bit different in the approach that I use to help with the learning. So just an idea there. And again, hopefully that might help with homeschooling. I'm curious to try it myself. I know my daughter is a teacher to her Barbie doll, so it might be a way that she retains better. Okay, so that's generally how children are learning and motivation, and there's probably lots of other stuff. Here's a few little bits in terms of how our nervous system works, because I think that's a really important bit where we move learning in general to learning skills in terms of movement skills. So very simply, I don't want to get heavy in this because we've got lots to get through. But how do we move? How do we learn skill? Essentially, we have messages from the brain going down to our muscles to tell them to move in a certain way in certain orders. Okay, and that's our nervous system. That's our neural pathways to make our arms do anything. So my hand opening and closing is going to be based on like the message coming from my brain to my muscles to make me do that. Now, essentially what happens is with lots of practice, this is why there's loads of encouragement around deliberate and deep and purposeful practice, the 10,000 hour rule. The more I practice a skill, the more I develop this thing called myelin sheath, which is almost like an insulator. So if you think about a cable, electrical cable, and you think about the rubber insulator, what goes around the actual cable itself, the thicker that cable is, the quicker a message is sent down the neural pathway. So from my brain to my muscles to make me do a movement, the quicker that is going to be, the more effective it's going to be. So what I need to do is a couple of things. I need to make sure the practice I do is effective and correct, because if I'm developing the wrong movement, then I'm going to be very good at doing something wrong. I want to develop something right. But also what I need to be able to do is constantly practice it in an engaging, fun way. Because if I'm going to tick them 10,000 hours or whatever variation that might be for every youngster, I need to make sure it's something that's engaging, because we're not going to get that chance of covering 10,000 hours at a typical track night. We need to think about how do we get them to do these skills outside of the club? How can we make it really engaging for them? So in essence, when we're looking at it, the better we practice, the more we practice, the more it's going to be easier to do that movement. So if you all think about that one moment where you've knocked a glass and you suddenly caught that without even thinking about it, that's the message coming from your brain down to your muscles to let you do that effectively really quickly, where you must have practiced catching and moving at some point to be more effective at that. So this is really key things for us to understand in order to make sure that whatever activities we give to kids is ticking all these boxes. So a little bit more about sport skills and motor learning. So the key bit there, and I'll give you a few moments to just run your eyes over it. Okay, really good question from Martin around what age is myelization most active? In terms of our nervous system, it's developing pretty much up to early adulthood, so we're still developing skills, and you can still, people can still learn new skills. So there's a really good argument you should always keep on learning new skills. There's some research where actually says in the elderly, for them to help with their nervous system, if they learn new skills, they keep on relaying or making the myelization thicker around their nervous system. So it's always constantly developing. But in the younger age group, we tend to have very limited myelin around our nervous system. Hence, when you're a baby, you haven't really got any motor control. As you get older, You start to practice and you start to wrap that myelization or the myelin sheath around your nervous system, and then it moves faster. So I would say the skill hungry years, as they're sometimes called, 7 years onwards is where kids start to get better coordination. They start to get better motor movements, and that's probably through just the myelin sheath thickening. So perfect age really for a lot of clubs. We start taking kids on 7, 8 years old. It's a great opportunity for us to really reinforce that practice. But remember, if we teach them the movement wrong, we're making that myelin sheath thicker. We're just making them very good at doing the movement incorrect, which is what lots of tennis coaches will say. They coach a lot of players to do a slightly different forehand return because the forehand return they've got is just poor, and they can't break that. That's there for life. They've got to create a new pathway. Okay, so just picking up on this particular area, I just wanted to pull out a few key points. The one in particular in yellow I wanted to highlight. So what we need to understand, just quickly whizzing through the others, is sports skills are voluntary, coordinated tasks with sport-specific goals. So what are we doing? Why are we trying to do this? Okay, learning basic movement skills is the first step towards learning sport-specific skills for athletics performance. So we need to learn basic movements like lunge, squat, hinge, etc. And then what we need to do is we build them on them. So we're making our, like, it's almost that foundation in the pyramid, the fundamentals of movement here. But when we get down to the second area of this particular slide, what we need to understand is coaches who understand groupings of motor movement skills. So they understand what is a basic movement, a gross movement skill, and then a more sport specific skill. They have a massive advantage in developing appropriate instructions. So if we understand what task we're trying to achieve, we can understand what instructions to give, so how we're going to teach, and also the training activities we're going to design. So what we're going to do with them athletes. So it's really important that we understand how skill is developed and how we use the body. So the other area we need to think about is the simple skill in is for one person a simple skill is easy, but for like another person that same skill is very complex. And I'm going to do the same task because if you were on my youth development conference back in March, I gave a task to everybody. It sort of like challenged some of them. So hopefully if you're on that, you might have improved on this skill. Very quick interaction with yourselves. What I want you to do is take your left thumb and hold it up like that with your fist in, and then your right finger out like that. So it should look like that. Okay. And all we're going to do is you're going to put your left thumb down and then swap. So your right thumb up and this finger comes out. So all you're going to do is swap. So left thumb up, right finger out, and then swap. See if anybody can do that. Have a go. Let me know how you get on. Okay, so tricky, awful, not easy. Some people have found it easier. Some people have probably practiced it before. Very strange. So these are all key, really good comments to think about. That's probably what goes through your athlete's head when you give them a brand new skill. So that skill was an easier skill for me because I've practiced that loads over the years. I've been stuck in many a traffic jam like years ago where I just practiced the skill. Looked a bit strange probably in somebody's rearview mirror, but managed to master that skill. And so it became a simple skill for me. But for many other people who could be the same age as me, could be older, could be younger than me, it's a complex skill. So what we're going to think about is we might have this assumption that it's a simple skill for one, but it could be a very complicated skill for others. And so understanding that is really important because a complex skill involves a large attention span, okay, and it requires a lot of practice. So there could be some youngsters who you think aren't listening. It's probably because it's quite a complex skill for them and they have to focus harder. The other bit, and like this is one of my favorite sort of like models I use, not essentially anything in particular about the model, but about this, it really is a powerful message that it shows. So if you're not familiar with this, I'm sure most people have seen this before. It's called the unconscious incompetence around to the unconscious competence model. And essentially, it's the journey that we go through when we learn a new skill or a new task as human beings. So we go from this unconscious incompetence stage where I actually don't know, I can't do what I don't know. Okay, so that's probably like when I've never driven a car before and I get in the car and I'm unconsciously incompetent. So I don't know what to do. and so I'm not very good at doing it. Then I become consciously incompetent quite quickly. So somebody makes me aware of what I should be doing, but I still can't do it. And that's a good sports skill that we see that a lot. So somebody introduces a brand new skill. Now, the key bit is how quickly we move somebody from a conscious incompetent stage to a conscious competent stage. So how quickly we make something a complex skill and we move it to a simple skill for them. Okay, and the quicker we do that, the more engaged they are. So it's good strategies to think about different activities and skills that you can do. So make the progress that you expect smaller for some people because they have a level of success. Going back to the way computer game companies structure their games, they make sure that the leap between levels in a computer game is manageable enough that it challenges the individual, but not too hard that they can never progress. Because if that was their game, then the kids wouldn't come back. We need to almost think like that and go, well, how do we make sure they want to keep trying these tasks? So it's a really good sort of thing to think about. And the way you finish off the model is unconscious competence is that bit where you just do the skill and you don't even think about it. Probably the best example is you probably driving a car, you've driven home from work when you've been tired and you've not really realized how you got home because your brain has just unconsciously driven you home competently to get you there. So we need to think about how we help youngsters with this. The final part really on the young people themselves, how they learn, is we need to remember everybody's different, physically, mentally, socially, emotionally. I'm sure you're all familiar with this, but we need to make sure that we can't just go, this is a game, these are the rules, we expect you to get this learning outcome, off you go, and then wonder why you've got varying levels of success. It needs to be adapted, orientated towards the young people, so even games and tasks. Okay, so I'm going to pause for a moment. Is there any particular questions now before I move on to the final part, really, which is the coach, your role, the interventions, the coaching approach we can do to have the maximum impact if we're trying to give fun games as opposed to just drill-based activities? And I just want to reinforce, I'm not saying drill-based activities are not a good thing. It's almost like how we make sure that they are the right thing is the question that I'm posing. Okay, I'm going to give it a moment while people are typing, see if there's any questions. Feel free to, even if it's clarity around what we've covered. If some of you are still busy doing your thumb and finger and can't type, then I'll leave the questions to the end. Okay, no questions come through, so I'm going to move on. So into the coach and the approach. And this is really you as a coach, understanding what different methods we could use. Darren just come through with a question. How do you manage to help an athlete that is far ahead of the others in a team setting? You could use them as a role model, to be honest. Darren, you could use an example of somebody who has gone through that journey maybe a bit quicker, a bit earlier. So you can start to actually highlight their journey. It serves as a bit of inspiration. It gives them a purpose as well. So it goes back to that pyramid. And if we look at the base of the pyramid, when we were learning the most and retaining the most, it's when we were educating others. So there's an opportunity to do that. Similar, do you encourage healthy competition? I think I do, but I encourage the focus on the right elements. So it's focusing on the sort of like learning opportunities. So who masters the skill first. It's also being clever with your coaching. It's about like recognizing that if you only ever compliment one person because they keep on winning everything, then essentially the rest of the group start to look at that person and have a bit of envy. And it's sort of like just may even create a bit of like that they don't like the youngster. So I would argue that you just got to be clever and careful with the way you structure competition. Some of the best things that I think we're looking at doing at England Athletics is we're looking at recognizing and rewarding who's the best performer, but also we're going to look to recognize who's the most improved over a period of time. Because the messages that you send when you do competition is the messages that the kids will drive towards. So if you say the athlete who has improved the most this month is the person we're going to celebrate the most, what do you think that's going to make everybody else do for the next month? Probably want to improve the most. So they're probably going to be eager to learn more. Would I start with a game before stretching? Probably with a lot of youngsters, yes, but gradually build up. Typical warm-up sort of scenario, gradually increase the intensity before we get into anything else. I'd probably leave stretching for youngsters to the very end. And with youngsters, they don't really need a lot of stretching, to be honest. They're quite mobile. Okay, so final one from David, and I'm going to move on. Isn't there about this is a lot about creating an environment where people can challenge themselves at the next level of progression? Yeah, very much so. I think for me, that the way you set up the environment will help people stay motivated. If you set up the right group, and there's lots of great coaches on this call who have vast experience about setting up and establishing groups, they've probably got high retention rates and high engagement rates. So they probably have a lot of success for that reason, and probably a lot of our athletes function in that high level of retention where they're educating each other. Okay, I'm going to have to tackle that last one. It's a great question. What's coming? How will you manage an athlete after lockdown? Their group activities. Um, they like to meet each other and make fun. Okay, so I would say lockdown has given us a massive challenge. One of the things that we certainly need to think about is looking at other practices where they work with youngsters. So nurseries are using bubbles. So they keep them with key coaches or key carers in that scenario in a bubble, so they don't interact with too many people. It's a secure way of minimizing the amount of contact and still keeping social distance under control. I think what you need to do is obviously stick with all the guidelines that were given by the government, but think about how you can introduce different activities where they can still get the same outcome. So there's going to be a few that I'll show you in a few moments around different games we can do. So we can still run a couple of races as long as we've got enough lanes. So as long as there's 2 lane space and we keep that 2 meter space in between the athletes, then that will allow us to do that. We're only on a 1-to-5 ratio at coaching at the moment for anybody who can coach, but that tends to be more seniors. When youngsters go back, we might be dealing with completely different rules. So I think we obviously need to take the guidance off the government and off England Athletics at this moment in time. But certainly think about how you can be creative as coaches and use leaders, young leaders, to support you as well. Okay, so I'm going to talk you through some familiar stuff you've probably seen before. Teaching skills. There's a whole practice. This is probably the best one really for more experienced athletes to work towards, and that is you did a whole athletics movement. So you did a whole high jump, you did a whole hurdle run over, because it's the closest to the desired outcome. You need to be as close to that as possible. However, it's really complex, so it doesn't always work with youngsters. But I would always, in some respects, let the kids have a go as long as it's safe, because you understand where they are in the spectrum. There's a part instruction, which is probably more like drill based. So we just take an element of what we're trying to do and make them work on that. So it could be just high knee drills. It could be pop-up drills in terms of jumping. It could be certain movements that we're trying to go through, range of movements for throwing activities. Then there's whole part whole, which is typically what, if you've done coach education in the UK, you would have seen, which is you do the whole movement. Then the coach observes a particular element that they feel that the athlete could work on. They take them out of the whole movement and then focus on that isolated area. And then they go back and do the whole movement again to see if it's made any improvement, any difference. And that's a traditional style that a lot of coaches use. Shaping, if you've come across that before, is probably akin to something like hurdles, where we gradually over a period of time shape a particular skill. So you might start off with hurdles being really low and really narrowly spaced in. And then over time, you increase the height of the hurdle and you maybe expand the distance between the hurdles. So you're gradually molding and shaping that event into the desired end outcome. And then we have chaining. So chaining, typically triple jump is a great example of chaining. So you teach the hop, and then you teach the hop in the step, and then you teach the hop and the step and the jump, and you just chain and you add an extra bit on to create the full movement. And it's a nice way of sequencing things together. So these are various ways you can introduce activities for youngsters. It doesn't have to be a full hop, step and jump. It could be, well, let's make sure we can do the hop really well first. But not just hopping, let's do hopping games. How can we do it so you can develop that? Probably one method I particularly like is guided discovery. And that's raising questions and providing options for athletes. So you're asking them what they think they should be doing and why they should be doing it. Because I feel that moves towards that base end of the pyramid where we're getting better attention, better engagement from them, and they have more ownership of their own experience. And then a few others that I'm not sure how many coaches on the call are experienced with this, but there are techniques and there are approaches for teaching activities and skills in other sports, mainly team sports, that we can learn a little bit from. So there's something called teaching games for understanding, which is hugely popular in sports like football and rugby, developed by several people. A particular person I knew was Rod Thorpe, who's done a great stuff around Loughborough. And in the early 70s, 80s, they tried to really encourage it in the UK, and it wasn't embraced. But it then went over to Australia, become quite popular, and then come back to the UK, and is now used quite widely. And teaching games for understanding, similar to game sense and similar to play practice, it is one of them ones where it's using the game as an opportunity. It's setting up environments. It's asking individuals to think about the task of how they can use the game to learn. Somebody's just shared, Nathan just said, model in rugby, they use it in terms of skill zones. So there's a great example. So they look at ways you can use skills in particular areas. Others, it's a case of decreasing the size of the pitch, changing the parameters, maybe changing the players, lots of variability. Now, think about how we could apply that in athletics, because I know there's a few coaches that have explored this, which is really exciting to hear. And they're saying, well, how do we change the scenario which is safe but challenging to do so? Because the one thing that we know is athletics is quite a fixed sport, but there will always be variables. There will always be something what happens in an event. I coach hurdles and multi events predominantly. Hurdles, there's always something could happen in a hurdles race. A middle distance, there's always something could happen. So creating learning environments, almost creating games like environments where they can problem solve is really good. One of the best things I think I've ever seen is I see a steeplechaser warming up before a big international youth competition who didn't set out the barriers in the right positions. He set them out in random positions because he wanted to change and challenge himself. He wanted to say, well, what happens if I get to the barrier too quick, or I'm in a pack? How do I cope with this? I need to create scenarios. So just really encourage you to think about that. And the final part really on that is some novice athletes being coached in a command style approach may think way too much about what they're trying to do. And it's sort of like paralysis by analysis. So we need to be careful about how much we focus on. You have to do these drills and skills. Get them enjoying it, get them learning by experience, get them talking to each other, create environments where they can learn. So the question you should ask yourself really is, in terms of where do you sit on this spectrum? Where do you sit on a coaching-centered style or a performer-centered style? Is it more telling and selling from you as the coach, or is it more sharing and allowing? And that may be different styles at different points. So sometimes we youngsters, they just want us to tell them what to do, because they have no prior experience. But as they gain more experience, maybe we should think about, well, this should be a shared learning journey by me as the coach and the athletes I support. And maybe we should allow for them to be more involved in decision making. So this is a critical sort of spectrum to think about as you move through. Now, me in particular, I developed this model. And what I wanted to say was I was observing lots of great youth sessions. And what I was seeing in certain environments was one extreme or the next. So I was seeing lots of fun, engaging games, and it was very much seeing lots of people having like a lot of initial fun. And it was really easy to set up. But the one thing I thought was lacking was the opportunity to learn skills, because the reason for the game wasn't being reinforced, or they weren't being encouraged to improve in the game. They were just playing the game. So I was seeing domes and dishes played, but not really having a purpose. Then I went to see other areas where there was lots of more specialized training, so more event group, and it was very specific, and it almost looked like I would expect to see a senior group doing. And I say, there's not a problem with that. That works really well for a lot of athletes. But it was outcome driven in some cases as well. So it was all about the times that they run, or all about the distances they jumped. It did develop really good technique for some. It was focused on technique in others. But the danger was sometimes it was adult orientated and just watered down for the youngsters, or some of the youngsters didn't have the foundation skills, so they couldn't really do the high level complex movements. So I sort of started saying to myself, well, actually, we want this developmental coach. We want this person who's trying to get the best of both worlds. So they want it to be fun, but it also needs to be progressive. Because remember, kids come down to master skills. They come down to have fun. If it was just about fun and not mastering skills, then progressive maybe not as important. It needs to be skill-based learning. So they want to constantly challenge themselves. Learning new skills, mastering new skills is a key thing that we see that youngsters want to do. It needs to be stage-related coaching. So where are they? I can't coach everybody in the same way, because some youngsters will be far more skilled and some will be far less skilled. We looked at that in simple and complex skill movement. And it needs to be empowering. We need to empower the athlete to really be engaged in this process. So if we really understand these key areas, it makes it far easier for us to be effective in the way we deliver. The ultimate example of where I think this sort of like is applied is in John Cote's model, where he looked at the deliberate practice I talked about at the very beginning of this webinar, where he said, okay, well, we know 10,000 hour rules, deliberate practice, and lots of people say that's going to help people excel in that particular field. But he started asking the question of, is deliberate practice that exciting for youngsters, or does it motivate dropout? If we're giving them something which is this repetitive, skill-based learning, but isn't that fun, isn't that engaging, it is really challenging, but maybe just challenging and that's it. Is there a better way we can do it? So he posed the idea of deliberate play, where we structure activities and games and fun environments where the children are playing and experiencing and experimenting and learning and developing skills, but the practice is lower. So we might give them some tasks, we might give them particular games what bring out the best. We want them to experience lots of skills and lots of sports, and then over a period of time they start to move into either specialized training or they stick with deliberate play, but there's an element of deliberate practice in there. The grey column down the left-hand side is rough age group suggestions. So as you can see, he's suggesting all the way up to the end of primary into early secondary age should be more about play and experience through that. Okay, so how would I set it out? How would I do all this stuff? So we talked about how the person learns, how the coach applies it. Well, for me, you can do lots of different things. A few people asked, would you start with a game? I would do a warm-up game. But the warm-up game needs to do the things. It needs to warm up the body for appropriate or what happens next. So you might do a run, jump, throw game, then moves into a running specific fun game or activity, or a jumping or throwing activity. You might also introduce, after they've had a go at playing that game once, some skill or drill-based learning. So you then go back to the game at a later stage to see if they've improved in the game. Whilst their perception is they're playing a game, the reality is you're introducing skill learning to them. And the more they understand the purpose of what you're trying to teach them, so the more they understand that you're teaching them to be better at the game, the more likely they are to then start to really engage in that learning principle. So what might that look like? Well, I'm just going to give you now, I'm going to rattle off to finish the presentation, a series of games that exist. And if you've downloaded or you're using the 365 resource, there's lots of different games in there, but the important part is understanding why them games are being developed. So one of my favorite games is called Beat the Clock, and essentially it is about setting your own targets. So typically we might normally do 40-meter sprints, and we get lots of youngsters doing sprints up and down, and it becomes quite clear and quite apparent very early who's the fastest kids and who's the kid that nobody wants to race against. So we start to see that happen a bit. Whereas in this way, what we do is we flip that slightly. So the rules of this particular game is that you say everybody is going to start on my first whistle and they're going to run for a given time. And we normally use 9.58 seconds. So it relates to Mr. Bolt. And you're going to see how far you run in that given time. And then we're going to make you run again in a 5 minutes time. And you're going to see if you can beat your own marker, beat your own distance. So what you start to do is you take that focus away from every other lane and you start to make them focus on their own lane. So it becomes setting their own targets, becomes far more manageable, becomes far more exciting, because actually they're now not bothered that much about the person who's run further than them, especially if they actually make a better improvement than that person. It's also a beautiful visual of if they run 65 meters on the track, they can then say, in order for me to run as fast as Usain Bolt, I need to cover another 35 meters to get to the finish line. Okay, so it's a good, different way of doing it. Now, the beauty of this game as well is that we can actually start to really focus on individual learning. So we can use, and obviously this example was pre-COVID-19, so we'd put lane spaces in between here. But in certain lanes, you can have individuals using different starting techniques. So you could have a standing start in one lane. You could have a 3-point start in another lane. You could have a crouch start in another lane, because it's where they are in their learning. We can really focus our attention on doing the movement skills correctly. And because they're now focusing on what they do, as opposed to what everybody else is doing, they don't try too hard and lose their technical form. they start to really focus on how they can run better. So this is a simple game, changing the focus very much away from that. Okay, the second one is looking at encouraging maximum effort. So very similar, we just stagger the start. So in this particular one, and I think like I use this with a lot of senior athletes as well. You just start kids off at various phases. So the faster kids start further back, and the kids who are less developed in speed start closer to the finish line. It's a similar approach in endurance. I don't know if people are familiar with the out and back approach, where you get people to run out for a certain time. They stop where they get to, and then they have to run back for that same amount of time. And so essentially the people who are less fit will run out of less of a distance, but they still get back at the same time as those who are far fitter, run further there and back. So same principle, just use a slightly different approach in the way you develop this. Ways to develop rhythm and hurdle running, and there's some really like high level hurdle coaches what I've dialed in to the webinar, so thanks for dialing in. I think one of the things hopefully they would reinforce is rhythm is a real key thing that we should be developing in youngsters, the ability to hurdle both legs, but the ability to get that nice fast rhythm. If you use a hurdles grid or you use a game like this where you space out the hurdles and that's the focus, so the height's lowered down, you're shaping the skills, you develop it in that way, and you are gradually moving them up the scale. So the way the hurdle grid works is that you set out one lane 3 meters apart in between each set of hurdles, then 4 meters apart, then 5 meters apart, then 6 meters apart. You encourage the children to find the hurdle lane, what gives them the best rhythm, because that's the focus. So they then understand how far away the hurdles need to be for them to keep a good, consistent, effective rhythm to take off and land in the right way. Now, yeah, we have to fit into certain distances and heights when we actually run the race. But when we're working with youngsters, we should be getting them to think about rhythm over trying to fit them to a system that maybe they're just not physically ready for yet. So sometimes, rather than focus on the purpose, the rhythm, just let them have a go, and they will develop that anyway. Another great example, I really particularly like this one for endurance. Typically, if you look at cross country, some people get sent around the field. Don't know if anybody has fond memories and didn't really enjoy that. So they run around loads, but what they really didn't enjoy was that full field run. So some ways you can be really creative to that is if you use a football field and say, right, if you run all the way around the pitch, that's one circuit. If you don't want to do that far, you can do half a circuit. So you can run around half the football pitch. And then you let the kids self-select what is the most appropriate distance for them to run. So then that way they're suddenly engaged more because they still get back to the finish line at a similar time to the other kids who are maybe a bit fitter and stronger. And then over time, we can gradually encourage them to challenge themselves to their limits. Okay, so this is about understanding how gradually increasing the distance that they run. One of my favorite ones that I brought in was Pac-Man. So using all the lines on a playground. I don't know how many people remember Pac-Man as a game, but it essentially you just use all the lines and you have somebody who's chasing around the kids. And this is a race walking game. So I know race walking has a bit of a mixed reaction. I think it's great in terms of conditioning the shins, etc. So it's a really good activity to do with youngsters. It's quite fun. And again, most of the kids will play this. They don't even realize they're doing a race walking technique. We give them a couple of tips, and this is what the rules. And the rules are you have to follow the race walking action and stay on the line. But they are so busy focusing on a game or a hobby that they normally typically like to play that we get the task done. So again, it's not necessarily with youngsters, it's about making it more drill-based race walking. It's about play the game and let them experience the skills through that game. In more jumping activities, vertical flight, this is just another example how we use equipment to encourage them to take off and get a bit more height. So put in something just in front of the long jump pit to encourage that takeoff and driving upwards is a really good skill to do. And so sometimes don't just tell them what to do. Remember that paralysis by analysis, because if they think, I have to do this before they even got to the pit. If you just say to them, I'm going to put a hurdle in the way and I want you to take off and go upwards, then let them have a go at it and make that the focus, because the equipment might actually help them dictate the way that they then perform the skill. And that way that it starts to develop a habit without us reinforcing too many technical points. Just a few more to go through. So again, using equipment, we've got a hurdles grid, we've got triple jump grids. I'm sure many of you have seen this before, but I love the grid system. I think it's really useful for gradually increasing the skill level of individuals. So again, we use cones or we use rubber dots to set out a hop, a step and a jump, and we keep them at equal distances. So in lane 1, jumping into the side of a sand pit, if safe to do so, or onto the mat, is cones or rubber dots split 1 meter apart. And in the next lane, it's 1.5 meters apart. The next lane, it's 2 meters apart. And essentially, you're encouraging kids to keep an equal hop, step, and jump phase, so it's nice and rhythmic. So through this, we create nice, fast rhythm of hop, step, jump. Keep them that hop in more flatter. We don't want to see a big hop and then a low step and jump. We want to see equal phases. So we don't really need to encourage that too much. We just say to the kids, we want you to hop, step, and jump so your feet land at the side of the cones and keep an equal rhythm. Now, what that does is it encourages them to understand that nice hop, step, jump phasing, so they learn quite quickly, quite early, the rhythm that they need to hold. So use equipment to encourage the patterns that you desire. And again, that's the triple jump grid just laid out, jumping into the side of a pit. Remember, it's safe to do so. Final ones. These are sometimes my favorite ones. Push golf. Push golf is a brilliant game, especially if you've got parents who like golf around. The reason why I like push golf, or you can adapt it to throw golf, is essentially you set out a rubber dot, that's your tee, that's where you start, you're throwing from, and then you set out hoop, which is the distance, the hole you're trying to aim it at. And you can set out multiple courses, use bean bags because it tends to be safer. But essentially, if you do shot put golf or push golf, you ask them to use a shot put technique to push the bean bag in the direction where they want to go. If you want to change that to throw golf, you can say a pull throw is one type of club and a push throw is the putter, etc. So be creative as you want. But the reason why I particularly like this game is you can reinforce good technique for all the pushing action, whatever the technique it would be. But the children with the best skills, the ones what can throw the object the first or putt the object the furthest, tend to have the least amount of practice. The ones who need to practice more, because of the ability for them to get it closer to the hoop, have more practice by default. So it's one of them bizarre games where actually the ones what need more practice get more opportunity, where a lot of games, the ones what need more practice get less opportunity. So I love push golf in terms of really expanding that out. And then the final sort of like games really from me is like this accuracy and power of like cross the line as a throwing game. So cross the line is you get one of these big fit balls that lots of people do core stability on and sit on. You put that in the middle of an area, and kids use bean bags to use a pull throw action, and we can teach them the good movement, and we could get them to throw at a particular object. So they start to throw at that ball, and the idea is that they have to hit the ball so it rolls over their opposition's line, as you can see on the task there. Now that starts to educate them on both of the pulling action, so they start to understand the further they pull back, the more power they generate, but it also makes them understand that sometimes accuracy is off. So it gets them to improve both accuracy of throwing and pulling motion. Now, the other alternative you can do for that, and something that I think is particularly good when you're teaching youngsters, is if you set out a badminton net or a volleyball net and you encourage youngsters to throw over the net. So you create almost like a barrier where they start to throw over. What you start to encourage there is the angle of release. So we start to say to them, the angle of release you need to throw needs to go over this net. So we start to educate them that angle release as well as speed of release is critical in any of the throwing actions. So these are all different ways where we can start to use activities to introduce skills. But what we need to do, and just to reinforce the point I mentioned at the start, is we really need to go down the line of understanding why we've picked them particular activities. So the final thing really to show you is a shot put grid. This is a brilliant way of laying out and really useful for you as a coach. So you can have, in this example, people throwing out from the center, so the direction the arrows go is thrown away from anybody else. We could have thrown out of different directions, different skills. So we could have people using medicine balls to push out one side, double-handed push. We could have people using bean bags thrown out a different way. We could have people using soft shot puts thrown out a different way. And as a coach, it allows you to make sure that go back to that level of everybody engaged, and it is athlete centered. Everybody with different levels is involved in the task. And again, just using a throwing line grid example, if you're doing something like javelin, you could have people using tennis balls, howlers, turbo javelins, and even javelins themselves or fin flyers. As long as it's safe to do so, make sure that whatever environment you set up to help them learn skills is appropriate, and it's also appropriate to that stage of learning. So it's for the whole group, not just the one individual. So that's it really for me. Hopefully that was a useful idea. There is a whole series of activities. The one underlying thing I would finish off with tonight is to say, make sure whatever game you pick, whatever drill you introduce, whatever task you give, understand what you're trying to achieve with that. Because if you don't, you might have that scenario where the tennis coaches got questioned by the parents about why is my son or daughter moving around the court without this stuff. It's really, really got to be important that the skills that we introduce are critical so they can improve from there. So any questions, I'll start looking for them now, but thank you very much for listening. Really appreciate your time. Okay, so questions. Andy's going to pop some questions on the screen. Thank you all for listening in. Andy, we've got any questions coming through at the moment? Would we be able to get a copy of the slides? Yes, of course. As I say, remember the video of this will go on to Athletics Hub as well. So yeah, really good questions about COVID-19 and how we adapt after that. So I think really in this sort of stuff, it's almost like I've been thinking to myself, what's the best way to set up these activities? So even to the extent of like, could you do relay runs? Well, you possibly could do, if you change the rule to rather than an exchange over, when somebody run past a certain marker, which we do in relays anyway, that's your cue to start running. With domes and dishes, it's almost like thinking of like the same movement principles you're trying to get to. So it could be that actually you just like move certain targets and say you have to like tap the ground in a certain way. So all we're trying to achieve with domes and dishes is we want them to change direction and touch the floor. So we might get them to do shuttle runs, and then we say touch the floor. They have to touch the floor as though they're picking up a dome or a dish and run back the opposite way. So you're constantly moving around, but they're then not touching any equipment, which is a big challenge. So good question. Cheers, Claire. Hopefully that was helpful. Almost all the 11 to 15 years athletes coming in to train for fun. As English, what is the main goal? What skills have you, what skills have to achieve athlete at the age level? Do you have any top set targets as a country or just train for fun? We are always looking at improving the skill set. So essentially the fun part is about retention, to be honest. And it's about ensuring that we retain all those individuals as they go through that experience and develop the skills for them to excel at a later stage. So it's about building the foundation, the fundamental skills. Then we want them to learn the sport specific skills at a basic level through fun games. And then when they feel that actually they're starting to see some level of success and starting to focus more, then more traditional based drills activities is somewhere where they want to go. We are aware as a governing body, I think like many governing bodies around the world though, there's a massive dropout rate roughly around 11, 12 years and also 14, 15 years in our sport. And a lot of that is cited because kids have stopped enjoying what they're doing. So we need to make sure it is fun. It is progressive. We do help people fulfill their full potential, and we do it in multiple different ways. So thanks for that one. Okay, I'm setting up a running club junior section. How do I best convince the benefits of multi-movement activities past the road running community? Really good question, Darren. So in terms of that, obviously we're looking at developing that nervous system that I mentioned. So if you're doing a road running event, at some point, at any point, you're going to have to change direction. So developing the ability to change direction, stabilize, make sure I'm stable through my hip, knee and ankle is going to help make that movement more efficient. It's probably going to minimize the chance of me picking up an injury. It's certainly going to make me more adaptable to the terrain I have to deal with. And there's lots of challenges, obviously, on roads. etc. It's also one of them ones where the more versatile kids are, the more creative they're going to be in terms of what they can do. Uh, and in all honesty, there's certain elements where some people that start off from road running communities might want to start to transfer that into different areas. So they might end up coming on the track. And my argument would be, well, if they've learned lots of skills, they're probably more adaptable to learning to run over obstacles, learning to do steeplechase barriers, they're learning to do other tasks. They may even move into triathlon where they need to learn other skills, or even biathlon. So I think giving them the broadest aspect is not just about learning skills and being a multi-eventer. That's not the aim of it. It's about being very holistic and having the all-round conditioning. So yeah, good question, big challenge, but hopefully one you can succeed. Where is the best advice on long jump run up distance for young athletes? James, really good question. I asked the same question myself when I was a younger coach to a gentleman called Peter Stanley. Peter Stanley coached Jonathan Edwards, among other people. Peter said, especially around the teenage years, like 12 years upwards, if you use the rule of thumb of their age as being the run up, it's a really good target. If you're working with triple jumpers, when they get to the age where they can triple jump, it's normally their age minus 2 strides. So a 12-year-old, 12 strides, a 14-year-old, 14 strides, and obviously depending on what leg they start on and what leg they take off, you might go up or down one. Triple jump, when they're able to do that, take two strides off that number. Hopefully that was helpful. Are there any more webinar sessions related to junior clubs coming up? So next week we're doing a revisit on Athletics 365 and how to use that. So anybody who missed the first webinar, and that'll involve a little bit about how to set up plans for your junior section. We also, as I say, on Athletics Hub, keep an eye out for the 2 video sessions of Rachel Burney and David Millett, where they talked about what they've established at their own clubs. Fascinating stuff, really good to view. And then I would say there are planned junior sections, activities, youth development programs moving forwards. We're just looking at a new series of youth webinars in the near future. So hopefully that's helpful, Emma. Really good question, Gary. At this moment in time, we've moved away from the hardback, almost perfect timing, sadly, in terms of the way COVID-19 hit us, that we were able to share all the resources via the app. One of the things that we're trying to do at the moment is make sure all the revised version of resources are all correct, fit for purpose, don't need any updating. And then if there's a huge demand out from that, we probably will look to go back to the hard copy. But in terms of being the most effective way to get it out to people at the moment, the app seems to be working. I do know personally, though, there's a massive interest for the folders and the book still. So yeah, keep an eye out, and there'll hopefully be an update. Probably more likely that would be discussed post lockdown. What do we have to do for maintaining an athlete at this difficult time? I think motivation. I think like looking at the social aspect, the bits that they're missing. So anybody can train, but probably most athletes would tell you it's really hard to train on your own. It's really hard to stay motivated. They're probably missing their friends. They're probably missing that interaction. They're probably missing that banter that like loads of athletes have. So I've used like virtual connection. So we've used House Party. My athletes are a little bit older, so it's easier to manage with that. But you could use Zoom classes. You could look at making sure that when they come back, there's elements of social interaction, obviously at a distance. But yeah, making sure that wherever we can, even if it's a catch up just to have a chat about how things are going. I think some young people miss that routine of every Tuesday and Thursday evening, it's seeing my mates, doing a training session, and then having a laugh, and then I go home. At the moment, that's missing, and they lack that structure and that excitement. So try and think of wider than just the technical bits, what you can give as a coach, more of the social and the support that you can give as well. And take a few more questions and then I'll wrap it up. So thanks for everybody for staying on. Lots of stuff on the 365, looks good for sports or environment. Do you have any suggestions for all year round outside where the weather may be bad? So yeah, lots of the activities we try and do are with minimal amount of equipment and restricted spaces. So yeah, a lot of it can be done in a sports hall. I think what you got to look at is obviously whenever you're throwing, throw into a wall. Whenever you are jumping, make sure it's a soft surface. If it's outside, I think like the things you got to look at is keeping them moving, keeping them warm. So I would say, look at any suggestion, look at the environment that you're working with and what you've got to play with, because some people have a big sports hall. Where I coach, we get access to 4 badminton courts in our sports hall, which is very good and very lucky. But I know other clubs are working with 1 badminton court, so you almost have to work your sort of areas. And very cleverly, what a lot of good clubs do is they section off their sports hall. They put cones down to section off what they're doing in each space. So keep them active if they're outside, keep them moving, try and keep it fun. So they're more focused on that than how cold or wet it might be. Thanks for that, Eric. And I think that might be it. So once again, thank you, everybody. Really enjoyed your contributions tonight. Thanks to Andy for brilliant support as well, as always. Have a great evening. Take care, and I'll hopefully see you all next week for the review of the 365. But if not, then stay safe, and I'll see you in the near future. Thanks again.